Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Seekers session for October. I hope you're having a great weekend. And let's say hi to Jay Cobley. How are you, Jay?
Hello, Mark. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So, this month we're going to be looking at the topic of optimism. The soul refuses limits, as Ralph Waldo Emerson put it. Optimism as a force of nature. We're going to consider optimism as a natural part of our human repertoire. The optimism we're talking about is the kind that's connected to nature's own generative, procreative power that's always animating our lives and moving the creation. This innate power, which we see all around us and in ourselves, is proof positive that life will continue to evolve dynamically, and that we, as participants in this creation, will also continue to evolve as well. Optimism is increased through questioning, through expanding perspective, and picking ourselves up after falling, responding to our challenges imaginatively and with more innovation. Optimism grows in us when we situate ourselves in the source of creation. As Emerson put it, quote, place yourself in the middle of the stream of power and wisdom which animates all who it floats, and you are without effort impelled to truth, to right, and perfect contentment, unquote. Let me just repeat that. Place yourself in the middle of the stream of power and wisdom which animates all who it floats, and you are without effort impelled to truth, to right, and perfect contentment. Isn't that beautiful? What Emerson is saying is that when you align yourself with this stream of power and wisdom, hope increases as well. You feel energized, you feel curious, and more equal to the challenges before you. It is so easy these days to become pessimistic, with new wars starting overnight. It's all too simple to doubt ourselves and the behavior of other human beings. The horrors are simply undeniable. And yet you also find that when you're linked to this universal source at the heart of creation, even the most serious obstacles become dwarfed in the face of nature's greater powers and the divine intelligence itself. As humans, you and I are wired for repair and for regeneration. The mind and the body have a genius for healing and for higher states of consciousness. My dear friend Lucy Greeley used to wonder over this. Lucy had been treated for cancer of the jaw as a child, and she'd had dozens of major surgeries to correct the damage over the years. And one day in her apartment after one of these procedures, she was talking to me about optimism and hope. And this is what she said. She said, people think of joy as something to be acquired. What I've learned is that joy is simply the absence of suffering. I learned that when pain subsides just a little, I can have these moments of intense euphoria, not through the acquisition of anything outside of me. The joy is already there. I just need the pain to let up a little, and there it is. It's really a profound, miraculous thing. The euphoria and the joy that Lucy was describing had arisen of their own accord from a body and a mind that were deeply wounded. This gave Lucy a feeling of awe, a sense of uplift and hope. That's the natural generative force that's the source of our optimism and possibility. And it's also largely hidden from us much of the time behind all of the noise of our negative thinking. To increase awareness of the optimistic power that is latent in you, it's important to be aware of the mind's tendency to paint the world with hopelessness and project negativity all around us. This habit of seeing as through a glass darkly kills hope and insight and can leave us stumbling around in the dark. Emerson describes it as people who have the instinct of a bat to fly against every lighted candle and put it out. And that's what the bat-like mind does, extinguishing its own light in an excess of caution or fear of disappointment or uncertainty. We deplete our optimistic energy by placing our focus on what's wrong and forgetting to factor in what's right with equal enthusiasm. And that's what leads to a kind of soul sickness, anomie, acedia, desperation. In fact, pessimism is the enemy of faith and an obstacle in the path of human potential. As seekers, our practice is to continue to brighten, to move from hopelessness to hope, and to keep the energy of nature alive in us. That's what St. Francis was talking about in his famous prayer. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. Francis was suggesting that optimism is a choice. It's an orientation toward beauty, toward goodness, and toward truth. And Ralph Waldo Emerson agreed wholeheartedly with this idea. As he put it, don't waste yourself in rejection or bark against the bad, but chant the beauty of the good. Chant the beauty of the good. Then he goes on to say, even in the mud and scum of things, something always, always sings. Isn't that great? Even in the mud and the scum of things, in other words, in the mess of life, when things are problematic, something always, always sings. And being able to hear that song, that voice of levity, the voice of continuity, the voice of possibility, is what carries us through the times when we could easily sink down into and drown in the mud and the scum of things. Now, unfortunately, optimism these days is a minority view, and it's sometimes difficult to express optimism in this doomsday moment. We're often accused of being naive or deluded or disingenuous or not facing facts, of being asleep under some kind of rock. Pessimism is much, much easier than optimism. It's a lot simpler to say no than it is to say yes. People who are wedded to a hopeless view often defend their negative orientation by telling you that they're simply being realistic. This pretense of objectivity is pessimism's great conceit. It's the con job of pessimism. The bogus contention that the more hopeless you are, the more well-informed and reality-based you must be. But of course, this is absurd. There are myriad reasons to be hopeful about the world, just as there are causes for concern. But pessimists insist that the darkness is bigger, more powerful, in the same way that they believe that evil will win out over the good. There's even a kind of cold comfort, it sometimes seems to me, in their grim predictions, rejecting whatever transcends what they already know. That's how pessimism becomes a failure of the imagination, as well as a toxic blow to the spirit itself. There's a parable from Hindu lore that captures this conundrum quite well. It's about a colony of frogs that live at the bottom of a dark well. These well frogs have been raised to believe that their narrow, dark, stinky dwelling represents the whole of reality. But one frog in the group isn't convinced. And one day, no longer able to suppress her curiosity, she climbs up out of the well and she hops to the edge of a cliff and finds herself looking at a vast glittering ocean as far as her eyes can see. This vision changes her forever. It gives her an entirely different sense of what constitutes the world and what we can hope for. But when the enlightened frog returns to the well to tell the others what she's discovered, nobody will believe her. They can't believe her, because to do so would mean risking the unknown, perhaps even doing a turnaround from everything that they had been told was true. This reminds me of the cliche, better the devil you know. Hopelessness is the devil that you know. And it's sometimes easier to hang out there than confront the threat of saying yes to the unknown and admitting the limitations of your own knowledge. But cosmic optimism, as Emerson called it, doesn't downplay evil or danger or uncertainty in the least. It simply affirms that evil is no match for the good in the long arc of human history. Of course, we have to pay attention to evil. It needs to be punished whenever that's appropriate. But evil itself should never be mistaken for the last word on what it means to be human. Hope though, needs to be grounded in facts if it's going to be helpful. This is very important. Informed hope, as opposed to magical thinking, is what we need to survive the avalanche of negativity around us. The great American psychologist William James made this clear. James, by the way, happened to be Emerson's godson, and he struggled with terrible illness as well as suicidal depression throughout his life. And he affirmed that reasonable hope is absolutely crucial to how we survive our own lives. William James wrote, quote, "The human mind and emotions are not made for this pessimistic philosophy and cannot live in sanity and health with it." The human mind and emotions are not made for this pessimistic philosophy and cannot live in sanity and health with it. So while our choices may be limited, they exist nonetheless. And remembering this is the only thing that, as James put it, keeps the iron bands from pinching beyond endurance. The iron bands. He's talking about the iron bands of hopelessness and despair, nihilism and misery. There are physiological reasons why thinking of possibility helps us in enduring. Research shows that belief and expectation, which are two key elements of hope, actually block physical pain by releasing neuropeptides in the brain that mimic the effects of morphine. Isn't that fascinating? Expectation and belief both assist the nervous system and increase select hormones that improve outcomes. So once again, we see here how nature adapts organically to tolerate and adapt to uncertainty and to preserve hope that increases resilience. But not all hope is created equal. So let me reiterate that. This is a very important point. False hope can do more harm than good. Jerome Groopman, who's a physician and an author, has observed this dynamic regularly in his many decades of clinical practice. Groopman says that false hope can lead to intemperate choices and flawed decision-making, whereas, quote, true hope takes into account the real threats that exist and seeks to navigate the best way around them, unquote. And that's why optimism is different than magical thinking. In fact, although much is made of our negativity bias, you hear it all the time, we rarely talk about the optimism bias that we're born with. The negativity bias is absolutely necessary at times in surviving dangerous environments. But the optimism bias is equally valuable in making us resilient in impossible situations by imagining alternate realities. We have to be able to imagine alternate realities when our backs are against the wall. It's very hard to overcome the trials and tribulations of our lives. As one researcher into optimism puts it, quote, this bias, meaning the optimism bias, protects and inspires us. It keeps us moving forward instead of to the next high-rise ledge. So without an optimism bias, our chances of survival would be severely compromised. And this is critical information today as the world becomes more unhinged. We have an increasing need for hope and optimism. There's a global hunger for spiritual direction, for justice seeking, for restitution, for truth-telling, and also repairing of the social fabric. We need these things. But this is actually good news, because alongside our collective trauma, there is a growing interest in our own potential as human beings. The pandemic has bequeathed us many terrible things. I don't need to reiterate them here. We all know what they are. But there's also been a rising planetary awareness of our shared impermanence and fragility, and that's a good thing. Our global collision with mortality has raised public interest in self-examination, in authenticity, identity, purpose, and what it means to be a fully human being. Knowing how quickly life as we know it can change, if not be lost entirely, has been a blessing as well as a challenge, reminding us that we must take care of our spiritual needs. We're reminded that, as Emerson put it, the soul refuses limits, and that the soul is always connected to nature, and that nature is always renewing herself. That's where we can find our strength in times of darkness and difficulty. And that alone, the possibility of regeneration and the movement of nature, is cause for great hope. So that's what I wanted to say to you today about optimism. And now, Jay, why don't we move right into the writing practice? Here we go. I'd like you now, folks, to take 20 minutes to write about how you can deepen your connection to natural organic optimism and the regenerative power inside you. Be as specific as you can be, please. 10 minutes in, Jay will open up the breakout rooms if you would like to connect with other members. Otherwise, just keep on writing. 20 minutes.